Welcome to today's episode of Talent Strategy 60. I am your friendly neighborhood talent strategy nerd, Dr. Jim, representing Circa. And today's topic is going to be hiring effectiveness, employer brand, and employee engagement. So we have a lot of ground to cover. And to get everybody looped in to the show and actually the purpose of the show, the goal here is to empower talent leaders to do more with less by leveraging collective intelligence. And that's why I brought this panel together. That's why I created the show. And we're looking forward to a phenomenal conversation. So I think it's going to be important for everybody to get acquainted with the panelists. So let's kick off the show with a series of introductions and some backstory so that everybody on the stream can get familiar with our guests. So first up, Noah, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about yourself and get us tuned into the work that you're doing at Ripple.
Jim, thanks for inviting me on this panel. Joachim, Sean, nice to be on the panel with you. Everyone that's joining us, welcome. Looking forward to discussing a lot of relevant modern obstacles and solutions to driving engagement, driving employer brand, and hiring as effectively as possible. My name's Noah Pusey. I'm the CEO and president of Ripple Analytics. Ripple wants to help organizations make data-driven decisions, drive objective decision-making, which results in higher rates of retention. But before I did Ripple, I went to law school. I'm a recovering lawyer. I still practice a little bit on the side because it keeps my brain sharp. I worked with firms in New York and Long Island and realized that there was a real problem in the legal industry with assessing, developing, and managing lawyers. Law firms are notorious for the almighty billable hour. In 1980, 1970, 1990, that probably didn't work as effectively as possible. But with the modern generational workforce, it's not just about the billable hours on any front. It's about what your net impact is. And I realized that from my upbringing on a small farm in Vermont, 7 siblings, we had to work together and we had to really interact, give each other feedback to accomplish whatever task was before us. And that was really at the heart of what I've done professionally, whether it's practicing law or co-founding Ripple in 2014. We really want to help organizations get better. We want organizations to realize that behind every employee is a human being. And we do that by gathering, crunching, analyzing data and giving modern leaders, managers, owners, the ability to look at that data and make better decisions. So I'm looking forward to discussing all that and more with the panelists. Looking forward to questions maybe from the audience, and looking forward to having a little fun today.
Great stuff, Noah. I want to tie that back into something that you just mentioned. You mentioned that one of the key things that Ripple and your work is focused on is helping organizations get better. And it caught my attention because a lot of that effort is tied to how you deliver the message. And I think that's important for everybody to kind of understand, hey, how do you properly deliver these sort of performance or improvement messages without shutting down the audience, or shutting down the person that you're trying to communicate to. So give us some insight into, briefly, into how that's shaped the nature of your work from an employee engagement perspective.
Absolutely. So we worked with an IO psychologist, Dr. Frank Schipper. And from the beginning of Ripple, when we were spitballing, mapping out what we wanted to accomplish, it was always a prominent focal point to emphasize success and emphasize strength. So what we've done is we've gathered data. Sure, we show your employee blind spots. We show maybe the shortcomings on certain personality traits. But what we really want managers, owners, leaders to do is embrace the good stuff, embrace the positives, embrace the elements of their employees that can be utilized to make those employees better. I mean, I use the word better all the time because it's such an all-encompassing concept. It's not more profitable. It's not more effective. It's not more productive. All of those things are important, but really you want to make better human beings, better people that you're working alongside. And the beauty of that is when you focus on the individual and the team-based model, is you have stronger individuals, stronger teams, stronger departments, and then overall stronger organizations. And in this era where organizations really struggle to keep key talent, it's a huge differentiator where you can show your people, that you care about them individually and want them to succeed by emphasizing what they're good at versus picking on them and really beating them down with what they're not so great at. And just quickly, by 10, 12 years old, your personality traits are largely developed. So if you're going to try to universally change a 35-year-old employee or a 26-year-old employee or a 58-year-old employee, the chances of success on that is very low. So what we do is we try to show managers it's okay for their employees not to be perfect, but acknowledge the good stuff, acknowledge the positives, and really work on that to create a better work environment.
Great stuff, Noah. Thanks for sharing. And you touched on something that's critical for a lot of organizations, and we're going to get into it in this conversation, which is how do you effectively keep the people that you have? But there's another part of that equation that I want to get into, and that ties in with some of the work that both Sean and Joachim are working on as well. And I want to open it up to Sean next and talk about the other side of the equation and the work that that you're doing when it comes to attracting talent and bringing them in a fair way into organizations. So Sean, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing, and get the audience up to speed on that.
Awesome. I appreciate that, Dr. Jim, and thank you for orchestrating it. It's great to meet everyone. Thank you, Noah, for that intro. I think it was very enlightening, and I think we're teed up for a really good session here. My name is Sean Paulseth. I'm VP of Strategic Partnerships at Wedge. To Dr. Jim's point, a lot of what we're doing now and kind of my background has been within HR. I started off actually as a recruiter and doing kind of my HR designations here in Toronto, and that kind of shifted into HR technology. There's all of these kind of gaps and technologies coming out to help with hiring effectiveness, to help with employer brand. How can we keep people more engaged? So I kind of got into the HR tech space and helping scale various different startups within the space, pinning different problems. Lately here at Wedge, we really on the side of the equation of candidate engagement. What we're seeing today is people dropping off. There's like a 93% application drop-off rate after they click apply. That is just horrendous. How is that possible? And I think it starts with candidate engagement and goes into the employee engagement and how that's kind of an entire fluid kind of situation. And here in Wedge, we really want to help create a more engaging process with the candidate, more relevant. How can we attract talent that's aligned with our culture, our values? How can we let that shine through without in each kind of phase of the hiring process? And then, of course, that it doesn't stop there. How we can continue to work with them, and to Noah's point, things like rewards, recognition, focusing on those positives, creating that better engagement for that employee. So it's all interconnected. But here at Wedge, we're really trying to help attract talent, engage talent, and make sure that we can impact those retention rates too.
So there's a lot that you said there that caught my attention, and a lot of it is tied to the fact that you came out of a similar world that I did, because you and I have both been in the recruitment seat in various capacities. So I want to tie that back into something that you mentioned. You mentioned that there is a significant amount of drop off between application and follow through. So you'll attract candidates, get them to apply, and then after that they just kind of disappear. So what are some of the key factors that you've noticed that drive that drop off? Share with the audience on some of the things that they could be doing to prevent that drop off from the application point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, the length of application processes are just far too long. Going through them and been through different hiring processes myself, there's some times where you actually have to put in your data 3 or 4 times, and it's the same data. It's your name, it's just the generalized thing. Sometimes they parse it through your resume, and then you have to do it again. That kind of stuff is just unacceptable. And when there's the race for talent today, and you're hearing the great resignation or whatever you want to call it, you really have to make it a faster approach, which is more candidate centric. Actually get data from them, understand what they're looking for, what the process from their point of view is. And once you get that and understand that, and we can see this through Glassdoor, it's like the world of information. Everything of that is so important to your employer brand. So how you treat your candidates, make sure you follow up with them right away. Hey, you know what? That's a great. Make sure you give them feedback if maybe they're not a good fit. All of that's going to be crucial to creating a more engaging process for that candidate and shine your kind of the engagement, the values, and what your company represents.
That's great stuff, and I think you're hitting at some of the things. And I dropped a question in the chat online for some of the factors that the audience has experienced in terms of dropping off from the application process. But it all feeds into time to fill. So if you have an overly long process, how long can you afford to have that role open before you actually make a hire? Because in that entire process, you're burning money in terms of cost. So great stuff. Looking forward to the conversation. Last but certainly not least, Joachim, welcome to the show. I'd like you to get the audience up to speed on some of the work that you're doing, and it's absolutely related to the stuff that both Noah and Sean have already talked about.
Yep.
So I'll yield the floor to you and have you get us up to speed.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Noah and Sean, for kicking this off. And I'm Joachim, CEO and founder of Aspiration Marketing. We have resources in the US and Canada and in Europe. Digital marketing agency, especially focusing on inbound marketing and drive. Noah mentioned it, better growth, and we'll come back to that. Growth on both on the revenue side, but also support marketing on the recruitment side, because and I'm pretty sure we'll cover that later in the discussion. The whole buyer's journey and what you do on the revenue side with marketing, employer branding on the other side, and attraction and working the various cycles. That journey is very similar in some of the approaches. Is very similar to what needs to happen to have a successful recruitment experience, recruitment journey. We've been working with some of the high growth technology company, both in Europe and in the US. UiPath is one example, but also have a number of both customers and partners. On the HRTech side, names are Smart Dreamers as an example in Europe. On the recruitment marketing automation side, or also Jobful, who is providing a pretty nifty solution on the gamification of the recruitment process. And on the sales side, it would be retargeting, remarketing. In the recruitment space is, how do I stay in touch with candidates who don't fill the role in round one, because you don't have that many openings, but you want to keep in touch with a great candidate who might be the perfect fit for a role you currently don't have, but might have later on in the process. So those are some of the things we've been working on in the past, and super excited about being here with Sean and Noah to see what we can go through as part of the process Jim laid out.
So it's you mentioned a few things that were interesting, and I want to tie this together with some of the work that you've done previously from an employer branding perspective. You brought in a couple of components about, hey, a candidate might apply for a job, and then one of the critical aspects of that employee experience or candidate experience and brand experience is, how are you getting them in process for maybe the next job or a better job? Tell us a little bit about how that exercise of thinking about your candidate landscape as sort of a perpetual pipeline and retargeting them for the right role. What's the impact on employer brand when you're actively doing that versus what is typical in the in the talent acquisition landscape when you're dealing with candidates?
Right. Great question. And employer branding is what impact does employer branding have, and what impact does it have on the takeaway there that the candidates have? I mean, I don't have the exact percentages in front of me, but 90-some% of people that you end up interviewing, probably even more, will not make it, will not fill the job you currently have, because you only have a very defined number of openings. So how do you, when you have the same role or similar roles, or roles that the candidate has experience and qualifications for, how do you fill that in 4 months from now? And it is so much easier and so much faster and so much less expensive if you can tap into your own network of people you interacted with before, as opposed to yet again going out cold with recruiters, going out cold with paid advertisements, etc. So the whole fact that you can tap into a pool of resources and keep them engaged throughout the process is, from our perspective, a big plus that eventually then translates into lower cost of acquisition.
Got it. So I want to set the tone for the rest of the conversation and dive right in. And a few things to the folks that are watching on the stream. If you resonate with any of the particular comments that are made, make sure that you are dropping an emoji. If you have questions, drop that in the chat, and we are prepared to respond on the fly and address those questions as they come up. So I definitely encourage everybody to be active in the chat and comments. So one of the things that I want to call out is that, we're talking about a topic that seems to be so broad: employer brand, hiring effectiveness, and employee engagement. These things seem to be disconnected and occur at various stages of the candidate life cycle. But here's the reality of it. One of my favorite Canadians, Steve Watt, who is the director of marketing at Seismic, he often says that brand begins at the edge of the enterprise. And I'm extending that even further when we're looking at the candidate life cycle, when I say, look, if you want to create an engaged workforce, that starts before a candidate is even, it starts before the hiring phase. The experience that you're giving them from first touch point all the way through that process is going to determine how they view you and how they respond to your entire application process, hiring process. And then it continues from when you get behind those doors. So when we look at employer brand, it's an extension of how is your process, every step of that candidate or employee lifecycle process, aligned with your mission, vision, and values, and how are you reinforcing or undermining those mission, vision, values through the entire life cycle. So that's a bold statement, and we're not going to solve like how you actually execute that entire life cycle in this conversation, but I want to give the panelists an opportunity to kind of respond to that statement. How well does that align with what you've seen, or is it even realistic to create that expectation? Sean, I'll yield the floor to you and give you an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Dr. Jim. And I think it is 100% a front of mind issue. And what we've seen over the past couple of years with COVID is that the Great Resignation, people are dropping off, people are leaving jobs to go to other ones that are better paying. All of that is happening. And I think it starts with kind of the employer brand. It is so easy to get information on companies now that I can then research someone's company and be like, hey, how was their hiring process? What was it like to be in that position before? I can connect with people on LinkedIn very easily. So finding out an employer brand and the experience from an employee standpoint, and even a candidate standpoint, which is very interconnected today, is very easy to do. So companies have to be very mindful of how they convey their brand, to your point, in every single step of the process. And I think companies are starting to do that and understanding, and that's part of the reason why there's such bad drop off. There is such bad reviews in the candidate. There's still candidate ghosting that's going on. Like people aren't showing up to interviews. And I think if you're able to create a consistent brand, things like retention rates will be impacted over time, because right off the bat, to your point, when you're attracting talent, if you're shining through your brand and what your values actually are, and you're showing a day in the life of someone who's worked there for 5 years and moved up in the organization, hey, this is why, through video, there's lots of great technologies to do that, then someone who's actually going to be part of that candidate process is going to know right away, oh my God, okay, this looks great. This looks aligned with what I want to do. There's remote work. There's flexibility. Like understanding what's important to your employees and your workforce today, and then conveying that to the candidate side is going to be crucial to engaging the candidates and letting them know really what your company is about and what it's like to actually work there. So 100%, I think brand is so important in all of those different elements. And I think companies are finally understanding that because of this talent shortage and the messiness that we're seeing in the labor market today.
So Sean, you said something that really caught my attention, and it's this concept of, hey, whatever you're talking about from an employee lifecycle perspective, that stage that they're in gives a view of what it's like to actually work within the organization. And I want to extend that that point out to Joachim. So Joachim, you can either respond to, hey, my overall hypothesis that if you want to actually live your brand, it's got to start at the very early stages of the employee or candidate experience and follow all the way through. But to Sean's point, I want to ask the question, when you look at that effort, how are organizations going about it the wrong way or missing steps to actually carry out their brand through the entire employee or candidate experience? What have you seen as common areas where organizations will trip up?
Yep. So, couple of examples there. Many people say we're not trying to find the best person for the job. We're trying to find the best person for the team, right? That has to do with the diversity, skills mix, et cetera, et cetera. A couple of different reasons for that, right? So, and the candidate goes through the recruitment process, and who does he talk to? HR and the manager, and nobody else. So, how do you operationalize some of those things? By example, you talk with peers, you talk with the people in the team you might be working with, right? Those things you can very tangibly show that we actually mean what we say, as opposed to, well, if your grades are better or worse, then we're making a decision. So it really needs to show in the steps of the entire process that you mean certain things that you're stating out there to be your employer brand.
Great stuff, and thanks for sharing that. I want to get Noah's take on any of the things that we talked about so far, but I think from my perspective, Noah, when I think about employee engagement, I think about post-hire. So, when we're looking at, hey, pre-hire to post-hire and what can you do to maximize that engagement component, I think that's an important conversation that you might be able to shed some light on. So handle any of the things that we've talked about so far, but also draw the distinction into the impact on employee engagement when we're talking about these things.
So Jim, perfectly phrased question, because I was thinking when Sean was speaking, really what we're talking about is human engagement. Ripple is about analyzing data. On our 2-year future path, we have Ripple interview and Ripple exit for a very specific reason. Even if you don't hire the person that you're interviewing, you can get data from that experience. Even if that person decides to leave after 2, 3, 4 years, you can get data from that person in terms of why they're leaving. And that means you're actually trying to engage the human candidate, and then the employee, and then possibly the ex-employee. And so at the heart of all of that is data, so that you can become better as an organization at realizing what candidates are going to work, what candidates might not work, and growing from that process. And so when you talk about hiring effectively, do you have a process that's in place that is at least somewhat objective, so you can point to data as a reason for hiring that person? When you talk about employee engagement, it's obvious. That's what we do. We gather information about the workplace experience, how people are interacting. Then finally, I think the whole concept of employer brand is capsulated with Glassdoor. I spoke with the president CEO of Glassdoor years ago, and I said, do you want your platform to be a platform for employees to complain? Or do you want owners to look at those criticisms and sometimes successes, but do you want owners to build and change from the feedback and the data they're getting? And he said, absolutely, that's our goal. Our goal is to make organizations better. So I would argue that employer brand doesn't even end when you're the employer. It ends for those ex-employees who go on to new companies and say, XYZ Corp didn't really work out for me, but I actually liked the company, but I had a different opportunity at this new company. So your brand follows with those ex-employees. That would be my global take on it. And again, data. That's, it's very important to gather objective information to make those decisions around.
I really like what you said about, the way that I interpreted what you just said is that we have to look at these concepts of in employee engagement, hiring effectiveness, employer brand as more of a continuum versus a linear relationship. and almost a cycle. So I think that's pretty important takeaway right there. So I want to switch gears a little bit and understand where engagement in general fits in, and how sometimes how that's perceived might not be exactly accurate. And here's what I mean. Joachim, this is going to go to you. A lot of times when we look at ideas about employee engagement and belonging and inclusion and any of these post-hire concepts, a lot of talent leaders might look at those sort of concepts as, oh, that's nice to have, and it'd be great if we can solve for that. But we're more focused on just finding more people to come in through our doors. And I'd like you, especially from based on your experience from an employer brand perspective and also recruitment marketing perspective, tie in why that position, we have bigger fish to fry, and focus on other areas versus engagement. Tell us a little bit about why that perception or why that belief is a little bit misguided and actually can probably steer you significantly into wrong directions.
Exactly, it's quite significantly misguided. And let me give you again the example on the revenue side, and then we'll look at the candidate side. I mean, on the revenue side, you look at cost of acquisition for something, and you look at the lifetime value on the other side, and that's defining your ROI. And I mean, in a very similar way, we all know this. Attrition costs money. We train people. We get them up to speed depending on the role. This takes month or over a year, and until we get initial traction, until the candidate or the employee gets traction. So if we're not focusing on that and trading churn for new candidates, I mean, that's extremely costly. And it's extremely frustrated. I mean, it's flawless as much as it can get. It's flawed as much as it can get.
So I'm going to call an audible. Joachim, you just said something about costs. And whenever we talk about costs, it gets my ears perking up. And I want to bring it to Noah, because you've got some interesting data behind the costs of poor engagement, the costs of turnover, and even the costs of when we talk about cost of acquisition, there's implications there too. So share a little bit in terms of what you've seen as far as the organizational costs of this sort of misguided thinking.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk for an hour on that question alone. When you talk about engagement, the ROI is very real. As a global concept, disengagement, right? So the opposite of engagement. Disengagement costs American companies up to $550 billion with a B dollars annually. So if that doesn't stop leaders, owners, managers to think about the importance of engagement, I'm not sure what will, but we'll throw some other stuff in. Engaged employees are 23% more profitable. They're 18% more productive. They're 81% less likely to call in absent. All of these are ROIs on engagement. It's not a warm, fuzzy, oh, the millennials want this, the Gen Zers want that. It is beneficial organizational wide, even if there wasn't a huge dollar amount tied to it, but there is a huge dollar amount tied to it. So it's even more beneficial. So yeah, I mean, the cost of replacing an employee can be anywhere from 50 to 200% of that employee's salary. Again, we're not talking 1%. We're not talking 2.5%. We're talking about major, big, significant numbers. And that's what hammers home the importance of engagement when I'm talking with a prospect, when I'm talking with clients. Do you treat it as an exercise of, well, I watched a webinar for an hour about the importance of engagement, or do you take the information and apply it to your organizational philosophy on the importance of engagement? Because engaging employees is not just an exercise that you do once a year. It's an ongoing event. And to have buy-in on the employee level, you have to have buy-in and actual practice at the top end.
It's interesting where you mentioned, Noah, that it's an ongoing event. And I think some people might get thrown off by the event label, and I'm going to come to you in a second, Sean, because people think in terms of employee engagement as, oh, we have a keg in the office, we have ping pong tables, we're going to have a quarterly outing, and they think about these events. And I don't think that actually advances the cause of engagement, because a lot of people will look at those sort of things as, oh, this is more time out of my day that I got to make up my work activities because it's being allocated in this particular way.
Yep.
So I think there's a consideration that needs to be taken into account when we're thinking about things like how do we engage. It's almost a daily event where you're present for your employees. But there's something that you mentioned that I think Sean is going to have something to talk about, and that's that data point about more engaged employees are, I forgot the exact percentage, but it was a pretty high percentage, less likely to be absent. And Sean, you know, when you're talking about attracting candidates into the workplace and doing it effectively and doing it in a high volume environment where absenteeism might be an issue, there's an engagement tie-in there too. So share with us a little bit about what you've seen when it comes to that entire engagement as a process philosophy and how that sets the tone at the beginning of the employee life cycle and how that can have some downstream impacts.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and Noah brought up something about data. And if you're an HR professional or talent professional, data is going to be your friend in terms of going to the table and being like, "This is what it's costing us. This is what's going on," and it's super helpful to have that data and to track that. Now, when it comes to absenteeism, I was actually just at a conference, Restaurant Finance and Development. And a huge issue in the restaurant industry, as people know, is labor and people not showing up to shifts or people dropping off like that. Those talent challenges are exacerbated in the restaurant industry twofold. So when I was at the event, there was a lot of talk about how they can overcome this. And it starts with engagement at that front end with that candidate. Instead of treating that candidate thinking, oh, we just need a butt in the seat, we just need to speed this up, you have to understand what's important to them first as an employee. So when you talk about employee engagement, understanding, to your point, maybe they don't want a ping pong table in their office. Maybe it's this, they want to be off at 4 because they have to pick up their kid to daycare, for instance. So understanding what's important to them and then transcending that into the candidate process at the front end is going to be so important to better understand what's going to be important to them. What's important to know, it's not going to be important to me, and vice versa. So understanding that, and it starts with data, tracking data, using technologies that are out there that help you do this is so crucial in understanding that. And when you understand that, you can begin to really create a candidate process that's centered around the candidate that you're trying to hire as opposed to what you think is good. And that will have a huge impact on people actually showing up to shifts and being engaged.
Great stuff. And I know that Noah wants to chime in on something that you just said, so I'll yield the floor real quick and have Noah respond.
Just quickly, I mean, Sean raises the point of ping pong tables. You raised the point too, Jim. Those events, those happy hours, all that stuff is a result of good culture, of strong engagement. You can't force engagement. You can't tell people that, or you can tell them, but you can't expect to get any kind of valuable return if you have a foosball table in the lounge room, because people want to hang out. They want to spitball ideas around the foosball table. You can't say you have good culture because you have the foosball table. That's the Google model, right? Google might have great culture, but it's not because of beanbag chairs and foosball tables. It's because people want to interact with each other. So I just wanted to add that in.
No, that's a good point, and it actually ties in pretty well to some of the comments that we're seeing in the chat, especially from Lawrence, who is monitoring the chat. So for those of you who are on the stream and have questions or comments, make sure you drop them in. Either Lawrence or the panelists and I will respond. But one of the things that Lawrence points out is that some of these things are performative in nature, and when we're looking at solving for the issue of how do you hire effectively, how do you build your brand effectively, how do you really have true employee engagement, I think it's going to be useful to kind of talk through how do we build an end-to-end model that embeds engagement through the entire process. And Sean, I'm going to start a little bit out of order because actually my position is that this would start at the brand, but let's start it at the application process or pre-application process. How do you build engagement into that stage of the candidate lifecycle? What's the advice that you have?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we've kind of created in the talent world two extremes. So either people are pressing one-click apply and not even reading the description, and people are getting a lot of people that haven't even read the description and then will actually end up not showing up to interviews and not being a good fit, go figure. Or the other side where it's so long that people are dropping off and they just can't be bothered to finish that application. So we have kind of two extremes going on in the market right now, which is causing some of those issues. And it's all centered around kind of employer brand and what your candidates think of your brand going through that process. And it starts, I think, with the attraction. So there's great ways out there to engage candidates, even through video. People's attention spans are shrinking. How can you engage people the fastest and most efficiently, highlighting your brand? A great day in the life video of someone that I'm applying to a role but has been in my position for 2 years is a super powerful way to say, hey, I've been in this position. This is what I've seen. This is why I like the culture. And you can see if you can align, or I can see a video of my manager. A lot of the reasons why people leave businesses because they don't like their manager. You want to get to know them right away. You want to know if this is a good fit. So there's a lot of great ways you can do that throughout that process to make it, instead of just a one-click apply because you just need butts in the seats and then lo and behold, they don't show up to their first shift, but also create a bit longer process that has things like video, conveying your culture. Hey, this is what we're doing this year. We're expanding by 20x. We opened up a new office here. We're looking for a leader here. Like, just being transparent on what's going on in the company and with that specific team maybe they're hiring for is going to be super important. And I think eye-opening as well, because in the world of information where they can get information online about your brand or about what the process is like, every single step is crucial. So creating one kind of in the middle that isn't very long, but it's still engaging and you can talk to a human, but it's also you're sending videos and keeping them engaged through that process, I think is important as well.
So there's a couple of things that I like about what you said, and especially the use of video, which I think is, in any number of capacities, it's a missed opportunity in a number of ways. When we're thinking about how do you build connection with somebody that you've never met or had a conversation with, certainly, having voice notes and things like that are important, but there's no better way in getting a window into your culture than actually having a conversation, or at least giving people a feeling of what they can expect to experience before they're ever set in your doors. And I want to tie that in and hand that off to Joachim, especially from the perspective of employer brand. So when you're thinking about how do you extend your brand and extend it across the entire employee life cycle, tell us about what you've seen when it comes to, hey, how job descriptions are structured, how the application process is structured, how managers are probably engaging with applicants before even the formal interview process. Tie that all into how that is going to make a brand experience more unique, and also the interview and candidate experience more engaging.
Right. And I think I want to touch on a couple of points. One is on the sheer term of end-to-end experience. The first end is obvious, which is the start. This is how we get to the candidate, and the candidate actually become an employee. But where a lot of employee branding comes in as well is, what's the other end? Meaning, many hire for a role, a job. You're a developer, you're a manager, you're this, you're that, and boom, I solved it. I've done my job. But what is the other end? What is it that we see this role evolve into? What's the career path? We want the people who stay and who have a career and who eventually take leadership roles and drive the culture of the company and themselves implement and propagate the culture and the employer brand. So I think the appealing to that aspirational part of the role, as opposed to here's a job, we hire you for a job, and that's what you do tomorrow. What are you doing in 5 years from now, right? Where is this? Don't tell them how hard it is to work here, but how cool it is when you're actually achieving your goals. Some of those questions: where do you want to be in a couple of years from now? Those developmental career type of questions, we see can have a lot of significant impact in terms of who are the people who are actually staying, as opposed to surviving the first couple of weeks of onboarding and then find out, oh, maybe that wasn't it, because they're not seeing the end of the horizon because they've never been told what's actually happening after they start with a job.
So I really like what you said. I mean, the way that I hear what you just said about, hey, what's the bigger picture? I tie together with the whole concept of visioning. What's the bigger picture that you want to communicate that's there for this particular candidate in terms of their career arc and what they want to accomplish? So I think taking out some of the boilerplate, time and seat stuff that you see in job descriptions and tying it more into, hey, what is the opportunity that exists within this organization as a important part of that job description is an extension of the brand is really important from the perspective of building an engagement model. Noah, what's your take on any of the things that we've said right now as far as building a model prior to hire, and how do you build a model that secures employee engagement post hire? What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, on a couple points, and I agree with Joachim on almost everything he said. I love the concept of the aspirational approach, right? And what having been a lawyer for 20 years in New York, it kind of skews you a little bit. But what message are you getting from the hiring partner, and is that message consistently being given by the people that candidate might be interviewing with? And I think if you're a partner at a big firm and you've been there for 25 years, you're obviously going to be a cheerleader for the firm. But what's the real life experience of being a first year associate at that firm? What message is it? Is it a consistent message top to bottom? It doesn't have to be identical, but if it's not consistent, I think that plays more into the decision to be hired. It's always fascinating to me when you talk about hiring effectively, but you also want to be hired effectively, and you want, as a candidate, to want to go work at a company, not just take a job. The ideal candidate wants to start and hit the ground running. And so when I hear the aspirational message, absolutely, but that has to be top down. It can't be just a billboard and then behind the scenes it's nothing like that, because more than ever in the history of hiring, there's third-party sources to validate everything that you're being fed by the people interviewing you, from Glassdoor to LinkedIn to even looking to see who works there and tagging them out offline and seeing if you can get a cup of coffee and seeing what the actual experience is. So I think consistency and message top down is critical, and obviously playing a part in that is gathering the information so you can make better decisions and appreciating that decision-making process.
So really good stuff, and I'm really liking where the conversation has gone to this point. And we've talked about what the problem is. We've talked about hey, what's the framework that we can actually embed this throughout our entire candidate lifecycle process, and we've started the building process. So I want to take it a step further. And I'm big into building models for things, and actually I'm more concerned about actually executing those. So when you look at, and I'll start with you, Sean, when you look at taking all the things that we've talked about and putting it into action, what are the things organizations need to be thinking about from a people, process, and technology perspective in making this become real? And it could be on the topic of hiring effectiveness. It could be all of this is related. But when we look at overall employee engagement, what are the things that organizations need to be thinking about from a people, process, and technology perspective? And then what's the first step that they should be putting into action to make it real, because you can't solve it all in 24 hours. So what's your advice on that front?
Yeah, no, and I think to Joachim and Noah's point, it's collecting the data, so better understanding where your employees stand and why they're engaged, or why did they choose your brand? Why are they still working there? There are tons of technologies out there that helps you gather this data and better understand what's actually going on in your organization. And then actually using that data to highlight things in the candidate process, or this is why this is the reason why he or she picked this role 2 years ago and is doing well. And I think Noah brought up an interesting point that don't just highlight the person who's, and I'm going to use a sales reference because I have a sales background, that's number one in sales in the organization. You have to collect information and talk to the people that have been there for 5 years, but maybe not at the top rep, but has still chosen your brand and worked there for 5 years and is super passionate about it. So being consistent and collecting data from, and there's surveys, there's things that you can do to keep them to gather this data, I think is step one, so you can actually understand what's going on. And then using that and being consistent through your process. I think consistency is is going to be a huge lever for you in terms of what every single candidate's going to see, what every single candidate's going to go through in that process. And then you can start to really understand why people are choosing your brand and highlight that throughout that candidate process, and then through your employee engagement model too. I know there's a number of different employee engagement models out there that people can leverage. There's like the Deloitte model, McKinsey. These things are important as a framework, but everything's going to be a little different depending on the organization that you're with. And collecting that data, rewards, recognition, training, and Joachim brought up an important point about internal mobility. Looking, how can you train internally and getting your organized and getting people excited about other roles in the organization? Like, how are you doing that today? Some people just feel siloed and didn't even realize that there was a job posting in the other side of the department that they actually might be a good fit on. Why aren't we engaging them? How can we engage that person better to choose us as an organization to grow with us, as opposed to now choosing another organization because they didn't even realize that there was something there? So I think there's a number of things there, Dr. Jim, but yeah, I think starting there with the data framework is probably number one.
I don't know how many times I got to tell you this, Sean. It's just plain old Jim. But thanks for thanks for putting all of that in there. But there's something that I picked out of what you said that I think is really important, and that's the concept of benchmarking. And at least that's how I heard it, is that, hey, if you're looking at, what's the people, process, technology, and then move forward as part of a solution, you got to start with the data and then use that as a benchmark to move forward. And I want to bring that concept to Joachim and tie it into a lot of the work that he's done before from a recruitment marketing perspective, a employer brand perspective. Why is that benchmarking element so critical when you're looking at developing these concepts of hiring more effectively, extending your employer brand, making sure that your employees are engaged? What have you seen that's worked really well from a benchmarking perspective that's actually led to better results from an end-to-end perspective on this topic that we're talking about?
Yeah. Benchmarking super important for two reasons, but there's also a pitfall. First good reason is if you're benchmarking something, well, you got to measure yourself first. So you got to have metrics. Otherwise, what do you benchmark yourself against? That's one thing, and it's good to have a decent baseline. I think where the pitfall is to make this some sort of a competitive exercise. The way we're looking at this is the best way of benchmarking, or your best benchmark is yourself from last month, where you actually compare yourself and improve against your performance from previously. That's the call it the infinite game, to quote Simon Sinek. as opposed to the competitive, we need to be better than Ripple, and Ripple needs to be better than Wedge, and on and on and on. That doesn't help too much, right? Because there's tons of reasons why this data, why a company A has different data and different is a different benchmark than company B. But you compare yourself to yourself from 3 months ago, 6 months ago, that is the same. That is the same case, and that's the improvement you want to see, and that's the improvement you want to measure.
I really like that you called out the part of the conversation where you're comparing yourself to yourself. Like, how are we incrementally better from one point in time to another? And I think that's an important frame that organizations need to take. I want to hand off the same question when you're looking at people, process, technology transformation. When it comes to any of these things on the employee life cycle, what's your advice in terms of what organizations need to be thinking about, and how do they move that into action? Noah, floor's yours.
All right, I want to commend the panel for not bringing up Simon Sinek for 50 whole minutes. Good job. But yeah, I mean, technology is key to anything in 2022. And if you're not implementing a strategy or solution around technology when it comes to engagement, you've missed a large part of the exercise. Why are you doing it? Do you want engagement because you're checking a box, or do you want engagement? You want to gather feedback. You want to gather information, data from your people, so that you make the organization stronger, so that you see the good, the bad, the ugly, and you react accordingly. Because my experience has been, and Ripple is a tool that gathers data and drives engagement, but my experience has been some clients don't want to see the bad. Some prospects don't want to see the bad. They want to confirm that they're the greatest company out there, and they don't want to do anything if the data doesn't suggest otherwise. So really gather feedback and act on it. Those are the two things I stress most. If you're talking about engagement, and I'll share briefly the generational workforce approach to engagement. You know, the boomers represent about 5% of the domestic workforce. They don't really understand what the need for feedback, engagement. Get your work done, put your head down, work hard. But that was a generation that had 15, 20, 25, 30-year tenures at the same job. My generation, Gen X, says, okay, we understand feedback's important, but we didn't really grow up on it because we were raised by boomers in the professional position. Millennials, they want it. They've had it for a long time because they've grown up on technology. And then the Gen Zers, they expect it. So if you take those words at heart and realize that, 60+% of the workforce is millennial and Gen Zers. And if you're not listening to what they need, what they expect, not just what they want on a whim, but what they've been grown to expect, then you're missing the ball.
So I'm going to stick with you, Noah, as we wind down the conversation. I think one of the things that you mentioned that caught my attention, and this has been a great conversation throughout, but I think the generational impact. What are millennials and Generation Z looking for in their employers? It's so relevant to this entire conversation. When you look at the largest elements of the workforce, organizations and talent acquisition professionals need to be hardwired in understanding what's important to those demographics and catering to those things when they're building out an attraction model, when they're building out a retention model, when they're building out an engagement model. You need to have an understanding of what's important. And as a fellow Gen Xer, I totally relate to what you were saying in terms of, hey, what's our mindset in the workplace? And frankly, I think in a lot of ways, the Gen X mindset hasn't served us well because the world of work and the relationship between employers and employees has shifted largely thanks to the things that millennials and Generation Z have called out. So when we're looking at solving for this, we have some good discussion in terms of frameworks and models that we can implement. As we wind down the show, I want to leave it with you, Noah. Share, not a takeaway, but a critical mistake that talent leaders need to be watchful for when they're looking at impacting in the areas of hiring effectiveness, employer brand, or employee engagement. What's the one critical mistake that organizations need to pay attention to and avoid?
100% getting generational feedback from each workforce. You can, as a 66-year-old CEO of a company, expect to implement effective strategy in terms of any of the three things we've been discussing today: hiring effectively, building employer brand, and driving employee engagement, if you're not asking for feedback from your 28-year-olds, your 35-year-olds, your 42-year-olds, your 53-year-olds. Because that you're unfortunately, or whatever the reason may be, as a 66-year-old, you're not wired to be able to truly appreciate. You can attend webinars and you can read white papers and you can do the research, but you've been raised on 35, 40 years of a leadership style that is no longer conducive to the 60+% of your workforce. So get other people involved. The DEI, I think we talked about it a little bit yesterday on a huddle, is important on all the levels. That DEI is important, that everyone's discussed over the last 24, 28, 30 months, and obviously a lot longer before that, but also looking to integrate opinions from other generational workforce participants is critical. Because again, if you're looking to implement strategy and you're not getting input from every portion of and every segment of your employment and employee population, you're missing the boat.
I mean, it sounds so basic, right, Noah? That
Yep.
If you want to know something, ask about something and then you'll find out. I mean, it sounds so basic, but it's amazing how often organizations and people forget that instead of and are just hanging out safely in their assumptions. So great.
Quickly also, don't gather the feedback. The number one problem with feedback or engagement: don't drive engagement, don't gather feedback if you're not intending to use it. Even if it's bad feedback, solve it. Don't gather it because you think your people appreciate it. It's better not to gather feedback at all than to gather it and then not use it.
Great stuff. Sean, same question to you.
Yeah, I think all of that's super relevant. I would say, if I'm a talent leader looking to unveil a new talent strategy without understanding the candidates that I'm trying to attract and hire, then where are you going to start? Like, how am I going to possibly attract the right talent for my organization if I don't really understand what matters to them? And I think we've kind of hit on this a little bit. Noah did as well. But you look at a job description that says it's a junior position, but you need 10 years experience and you have to work from the office. Why would you even put that in there? You're not going to get any relevant candidates. You're going to scare away the people that are actually probably good fits. Like, it starts at that front end, and they've gone it so wrong in certain areas. It has to reflect what your values and culture is, but it also has to be realistic and what's aligned and important to them. So if you don't understand that, then your whole talent attraction and engagement on the front end is going to be tough. And I think they're starting to realize that they really have to revamp it in 2022 and going forward.
So that, like, being in tune with what the candidate landscape or what the candidate population wants, again, another basic concept that often gets ignored. And I want to tie it together in a slightly different way. One of the panelists that we're going to have coming up in a future show is going to talk about, well, why do most projects fail? And he often talks about it from the perspective of, well, most projects fail because leadership on those projects don't communicate the vision to the project team, don't give a compelling vision of what the future looks like when this problem is solved. And that all ties into, hey, speaking to what's important to the candidate landscape as a way to attract them better. So I really like what you said there, Sean. Joachim, same question to you. When you look at, hey, what are the critical things that organizations should be avoiding? What's your advice? What are the key things that they should avoid, things that they should avoid from the perspective of employer brand and extending hiring effectiveness and employee engagement?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is the whole employer branding, talent acquisition, engagement is not a set of point solutions. You need to define the candidate employee journey, and you need to make sure that your brand, your key topics, we hire smart, nice people, shines throughout. And if you make a statement like that, example, we hire smart, nice people, you got to be prepared to fire the high-performing asshole later on, because if you don't, well, don't say it up front. right? So it's a journey. I think is the message and the observation here, and the more consistent you can apply solutions along the journey and along the candidate experience, the employee experience, the better it is.
So I like the fact that you called out a couple things. One, that it's not a point in time solution. You shouldn't be approaching this from a check the box perspective. But you also brought up the concept of, hey, you got to make a call sooner than later on the productive a-holes that are on the team. And act sooner than later, because that has brand implications too. So sticking with you, Joachim, I want to make sure that the audience that is joining us on the stream and is also attending the event, where can people find you?
I think there's a comment in there that we left early on. Aspiration marketing. Make a contact directly either on the website through our contact us form. Reach me on LinkedIn or through the Aspiration Marketing LinkedIn page. Any one of those is fair game.
Awesome stuff. Thanks for sharing your insights, Joachim. Sean, same question to you. Where can people find you? What's the best way to get in touch?
Awesome. You can see me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active there. I have my own webinar series as well. Anything sales, partnership, or HR tech. Happy to connect. And if you want to learn more about introducing video to create a more engaging process on the candidate side, go to wedgehr.com.
Great stuff. And thank you for joining us and sharing your insights. Noah, to you, fellow Gen Xer, I'm going to give you the last word on this before I close this down.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me. Joachim and Sean, a pleasure. Noah Pusey, CEO, President, Ripple Analytics. Reach me directly at my email, noah@ripplecrew.com. You can check out my LinkedIn page. We're running promotionals to get new companies in and active with the feedback process. Reach out to me and we'll have a discussion. Looking forward to it.
And obviously you can find Noah and everybody else on this panel on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect directly, or if you need an intro, leverage me. So I appreciate all of our panelists joining us and sharing their insights. Thanks to everybody that indicated that they would attend. Thanks for those that joined us on the stream. Thanks to Lawrence Brown for navigating the chat and keeping that active. We appreciate everybody giving us your time on Talent Strategy 60. Tune in next week for another great show and another great panel of guests that are going to be committed to helping and empowering talent leaders do more with less by leveraging collective intelligence. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.